So, where were we?
You seemed to think I couldn't both believe that the public decides its policy preferences arbitrarily and that they hold the ultimate influence over policy.
You don't think that's a contradiction?
Of course not. The only premise required for the conclusion Congress is subject to the will of the public is the vote of the public determines who is in Congress. No premise about how informed the public is while making its decisions is necessary.
You seem like the kind of guy who would be bothered by a system that allows uninformed people to have this much authority.
Oh, I am. Relying on the public to determine our leaders is a huge problem. Are you familiar with the work of David Dunning?
I think so. Is he the guy who says we're all idiots?
It's more accurate to say he's the guy who says we're all bigger idiots than we think we are. In 1999, he articulated the Dunning-Kruger Effect, in which he observed that those who are less competent in a field systematically overestimate their own competences. In 2012, he extended this to our ability to judge the competences of others. Those who are less competent in a field are less capable of judging the competences of others, i.e., an average member of the public with no training in economics is unable to decide which candidate has the better economic policy. If you would prefer a study more directly about elections, Larry Bartels compared the stated preferences of uninformed voters to those of informed voters in the same demographic groups. He found that uninformed voters' preferences deviate by 10% from the preferences of their informed peers, and this could lead to a 5 percentage point shift in electoral outcomes. E.g., the uninformed public could turn a 54-46 win into a 49-51 loss. If you would prefer a study with more sex appeal, Douglas Aller showed that candidates he euphemistically described as appearance-advantaged could enjoy up to a 15 percentage point boost. With this kind of evidence, how can you think anything other than the preferences of the public are arbitrary?
For the same reason large university football programs have such high graduation rates. You don't need to be informed if you can just copy the answers.
What do you mean?
I mean, uninformed voters act like they are informed by copying the preferences of their better informed peers.
Interesting. Is there any data to support that?
I thought you'd never ask. Jasjit Sekhon won the Robert H. Durr Award at the 2004 Midwest Political Science Association conference for his paper comparing uninformed populations in developed and developing democracies. He found that, in developed democracies, inattentive and poorly informed citizens are able to vote like their better informed compatriots and hence need to pay little attention to political events such as election campaigns in order to vote as if they were attentive. Since this paper was written 8 years after Bartels found his result, Sekhon thoroughly explains the errors in Bartels's methodology which caused him to reach such an erroneous conclusion. It's also worth mentioning that, according to our mutual friend, most of the political science literature in this area takes it for granted that voters respond to cues from their better informed peers.
Okay, now you're the one contradicting yourself.
How so?
If voters are able to act like they're informed, why is it so important for congressmen to raise money for campaign advertisements? If I'm an informed consumer of light bulbs, and I know that Acme light bulbs last twice as long as Apogee light bulbs, I'm not going to be persuaded to buy Apogee light bulbs just because they have more advertisements in The Economist.
Are there many advertisements for light bulbs in The Economist?
Mostly banks and luxury airlines, but it's the only thing I read with advertisements in it.
You're a snob. Anyway, advertisements matter. That's an empirical fact. A study of a Texas gubernatorial race found that the day after a major ad buy, the support for a candidate could increase by 7 percentage points. That's the difference between winning 56-44 and losing 49-51. Another study, this time of the 2000 presidential election, concluded that then-Governor Bush's enormous spending on advertisements in swing states during the final weeks of the campaign won him the election. Well, that and the worst Supreme Court decision since Dred Scott. Anyway, we have one set of studies that show people respond to cues from their better-informed peers, and another set of studies that shows people respond to advertisements. You're a smart guy. How do you reconcile these results?
The advertisements replace peers as cue givers.
Exactly. The uninformed public needs to get their cues from somewhere, so each candidate has a strong incentive to make sure she is the one giving the cues, instead of the local union rep or editorial page. The best way to do that is with advertisements, which cost a lot of money. Since the majority of the population is uninformed, it's more important to have the money to be the dominant cue giver than to have the policies an informed public would support.
Do you ever wish that, instead of relying on the capricious population to accept the right cues from the right people, we could accept votes only from those who were actually informed?
I know, right? Do you realize a person doesn't even have to be literate to vote? It's true. Sure, some states used to require proof of literacy before people could vote, but those laws all went away for some reason. I wish I could remember why.
Those tests were used to systematically disenfranchise African Americans. But you knew that.
You caught me. I did. I just think it's more fun when you're the one who explains why your ideas are bad.
Apparently, no one's ever told you that puckish isn't a compliment.
There's no need to be jealous of my youthful vigor. Anyway, I think we can agree on the following. While the people have the ultimate influence over Congress, they are too uninformed to make their own opinions. Money is spent on campaigns to allow candidates to give the people cues, but the most effective cues are not necessarily those which contain the most relevant information.
I actually agree with all of that.
Since we know from experience that restricting voting to only informed citizens is inherently discriminatory, there are only two ways to solve the problem. We can force the people to be informed, or we can dramatically limit the amount of money which can be spent on campaigns. Do you think there's any way to force the population to be independently informed?
No. And I also think the standard of being independently informed is impossible to enforce.
Right. So that means we're left with one option.
Damn it.
It takes a big man to admit when he's wrong.
Luckily for you, my wife says my waist gets bigger every year. You're right. The only way to solve the problem is to dramatically restrict campaign spending. But then there's another problem. Will you indulge me in a logical tangent?
Of course.
Premise 1. Physical symbols are protected as speech. E.g., I can stand on the Washington Mall and hold up a sign that says, "Socialism is not freedom," and be protected by the First Amendment. Premise 2. For a symbol to be physical, it must be created from property, i.e., my ability to create my sign depends on my ability to own the necessary property. Premise 3. Money is property, albeit dramatically abstracted property. Conclusion. My ability to use my money to promote my ideas is protected speech.
Yes, absolutely. But my ability to yell fire is protected speech, unless I'm doing it in a crowded theater, in which case it represents a danger to the public. The huge amount of money being spent on elections is even worse than that. It's a danger to the republic.
It's a danger which could be avoided simply by reading the candidates' policy papers.
And the danger of yelling fire in a crowded theater is avoided by not going to the theater. We need to make our laws for the dangers we face, regardless of why we face them.
So what do we do now?
Lawrence Lessig established rootstrikers.org to allow people to come together and take the necessary incremental steps to enervate money in politics. Other organizations, such as Wolfpack, are working towards a constitutional convention to add an amendment restricting the use of money in politics.
Is there any reason to believe this can have any positive effect?
Sure. Rootstrikers were very involved in the effort to preserve net neutrality, in spite of the millions spent lobbying against it, and the fact that the chair of the FEC was a former lobbyist for the telecommunications industry which opposed it. Net neutrality was preserved.
So what you're saying is, we can mobilize people as long as they're worried money in politics is going to interfere with how they get their porn.
Why do you have to be so cynical?
Why do you have to be so optimistic? I'll take what I can get, and in the meantime, I'm content to merely hold everything together.
How's that going?
I'll let you know next week. Until then.